You were taught to heal by forgetting, but forgetting didn't work. You smiled through the pain, learned how to show up, be useful, stay quiet. You trained yourself to function like the wound never happened. But it did. And you've been living like it didn't, hoping no one would notice the quiet damage stitched into your every word. You carry it in the way you brace for impact, even in calm rooms, in the way you shrink from kindness, in the way you apologize for existing before you even speak. No one saw how deep it went, so you buried it further. Carl Jung once said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Pain isn't just suffering, sometimes it's instruction, a coded message you weren't allowed to read until now, because what if the wound isn't the thing that broke you, but the thing that's been trying to wake you? What if it's not asking to be erased, but remembered, not to punish you, but to point you back to the parts of yourself you abandoned to survive? You've spent so long protecting yourself from it that you forgot. It might be protecting something in you, something soft, something sacred, something that remembers who you were before the silence took over. This is not about fixing yourself. This is about listening, because beneath the wound is a voice you haven't heard in years, and it still believes in your return. When you cried, they called it drama. When you got angry, they called it dangerous. When you needed too much, they called it weakness. So you adapted. You made yourself small enough to be accepted. You quieted your needs, numbed your instincts, turned down your light just enough to avoid punishment. That's where the shadow begins, not in what's evil, but in what's unloved. Jung said, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. You didn't banish your darkness, you buried your light. You didn't know what to do with the parts of you that felt too loud, too sensitive, too much, so you exiled them. But exiled parts don't die, they wait. And eventually they start to surface in your anxiety that arrives without warning, in relationships that feel like déjà vu, in the way you sometimes erupt or disappear, because the shadow isn't just what you hate, it's what you lost, your fire, your intuition, your defiance, your voice. And here's the risk you face the longer you ignore it. Every day you deny it, you shrink. And every day you shrink, the world becomes a little less able to hold the real you. The shadow isn't here to destroy you, it's here to be integrated, not so you can become someone new, but so you can remember who you were before the world told you who to be. This is not about perfection or performance or becoming enlightened. This is about reclaiming the pieces of you that knew how to feel in full color. The shadow is not your enemy, it is the invitation, and inside it is the gold. You didn't ask for the pain, but it came, and when it did, you built something around it. You built routines, boundaries, armor. You became hyper-aware of tone, of silence, of what wasn't said. You could sense danger before others even noticed the room had changed. And so the pain, though unbearable, became familiar. It wasn't comfort, but it was structure. It wasn't safe, but it was predictable. You stayed silent because speaking made you a target. You became independent because asking made you feel like a burden. You kept your distance because closeness always came with a cost. These weren't flaws. They were brilliant strategies. But brilliant strategies age like armor. They get heavier over time, and at some point the same protection that saved you begins to cage you. You trained yourself to need less, to speak less, to expect almost nothing from anyone. You called that strength, but it was grief in disguise. Because survival isn't the same as wholeness, and the wound, it never forgot. It speaks in the way your chest tightens when someone gets too close, in the way you replay conversations to check if you were too much, in the way you scan the room for exits you haven't needed in years. This is what unintegrated pain does. It doesn't disappear, it adapts, and it keeps protecting you long after the danger is gone. But here's the truth, no one gave you permission to believe. You don't need to keep performing okayness to be worthy of rest. You don't need to keep performing wholeness to be worthy of love, because the wound isn't demanding your silence, it's asking for witness. To be seen, to be named, to be held, not once, not perfectly, but honestly. Because when you stop running from it, when you meet it with presence, it stops being the monster under the bed. It becomes the part of you that waited to be trusted again. And what waits on the other side of that meeting isn't just healing, it's reunion with the version of you that still remembers how to feel in full color and never stopped hoping you'd return. There's a moment in every healing journey that no one prepares you for. The moment when nothing makes sense, but everything feels exposed. You can't go back to who you were. You can't stay where you are, and you don't yet know who you're becoming. This is the burning, the unraveling of the old self, the death of the mask, the loss of the identity you built to survive. Jung called it nigredo, the blackening, the beginning of inner alchemy, not transformation as a goal, but dissolution as a necessity. Everything familiar starts to fall apart, the beliefs, the behaviors, the false calm, the quiet lies you told yourself just to keep breathing, and suddenly you're face to face with everything you buried. You don't know who you are without the pain. You don't know how to love without overgiving. You don't know how to speak without first checking if it's allowed. But this is not your end, it's your crucible. You are not falling apart. You are falling into yourself. This is where grief teaches you what was never yours to carry, where silence shows you the sound of your own voice, where the ache becomes a compass instead of a chain. And as the fire burns, something strange happens. You stop reaching for what you lost. You stop apologizing for what you need. You stop asking for permission to exist. You start telling the truth. You start hearing your body. You start letting the pain teach you instead of define you, not all at once, not without fear, but with honesty. And in that honesty, the alchemy begins. The soul doesn't become beautiful because it was untouched. It becomes beautiful because it allowed itself to break, to burn, and to rebuild with gold in the cracks. The gold isn't found outside the fire. It's what's left when everything false has melted away. And what remains is real. There's a cost to waking up, because once you see clearly, you can't pretend again. Once you recognize the pattern, you can't step back into it without feeling the fracture. Once you hear your real voice, the one you buried beneath years of pretending, you can't go back to silence. This is the burden of becoming whole. Not because wholeness is heavy, but because everything you built in its absence begins to fall apart. You start to see the roles you played just to be loved. You feel the exhaustion of being strong for everyone but yourself. You hear the echo of your own needs, the ones you abandoned because no one ever asked. And what follows isn't pride, it's grief. Grief for the years you spent negotiating your worth. Grief for the spaces where your authenticity had to be amputated. Grief for the version of you who had to carry it all and never collapse. This is the part no one glamorizes. There are no milestones, no applause, no clarity, just the raw ache of truth, the slow, quiet dismantling of a life built on survival. But here's what no one tells you. Survival isn't loyalty. You don't owe permanence to a pattern that was born in pain. And just because it worked, it doesn't mean you have to keep wearing it. So you start shedding the smiles that never reached your eyes, the conversations that required your silence, the relationships that fed on your self-abandonment. And in their place, something terrifying begins. Stillness, not the kind you fill with distractions, the kind that asks, who are you when no one else is scripting you? This is not the peace of achievement. It's the peace that follows collapse. When you choose not to rebuild what once betrayed you, it's not confidence, it's clarity. And with it comes the sacred burden of choosing yourself again and again, even when no one notices, even when it costs you comfort, even when it makes you the stranger in the room. Because choosing yourself is how you stop bleeding for others and finally begin to breathe for you. This is not the end of your healing. It's where you begin to carry it with grace. Wisdom doesn't arrive wrapped in answers, it arrives wrapped in ruin. It comes in the moments when you break and no one saves you, in the nights when silence stretches longer than hope, in the mornings when you rise anyway, even with the weight still on your chest. Wisdom comes not from what spared you, but from what transformed you. Jung said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. So if you still feel fear, it doesn't mean you're failing. If the ache still lingers, it doesn't mean you're stuck. If the wound still pulses, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. It means you're awake. It means the story no longer owns you, but you haven't forgotten where it began, because healing isn't a finish line, it's a returning to your body, to your truth, to the version of you that was silenced by shame. You'll still flinch sometimes, you'll still fall back into old habits, you'll still question if you've gone far enough to deserve peace. But the wound no longer controls you, you walk with it now. You name it, you hold it, you let it speak without letting it drive. That's what wisdom is, the ability to carry pain without becoming it, to remember without reliving, to forgive without forgetting, to love without vanishing. You are not here to be unscarred, you are here to be whole. And wholeness is not a state you reach, it's a way you walk, a spiral, a descent, a return. You return to yourself not because you were lost, but because the world convinced you to leave, and now you've come back. If these words met something buried in you, let them travel. Let someone else feel seen. Subscribe, share. Don't keep this softness to yourself, because the wound didn't destroy you, it refined you. And you, scarred, sovereign, still rising, are what wisdom looks like after the fire.